The NC700X is one of those bikes that flies under the radar, way under the radar. In the US, it's a bike people don't even realize it exists. It does not check any boxes for most riders. It doesn't have any crazy performance, high horsepower, low weight, or anything that can get you likes and pats on the back. In a time when bikes have gotten bigger, more expensive, and harder to service, here comes the NC700X. A small, entry-level price, easy to work on, enough power to do everything, and we have not even talked about the utility this bike offers. The problem with the NC is that it's enough for most motorcyclists, but it's a bike that requires you to realize that. It's going to leave you wanting more if you intend on riding hard in the twisties. But if your idea of riding is riding so much that you're going to accumulate 200,000 miles, then this bike might be the right bike for you. When you look at car manufacturers, they have always struggled with making affordable economy cars. Anyone can make a luxurious car costing upwards of $100,000, but to build a car for under $20,000 that does everything a normal person wants, that's extremely tough. The profit margins are also very slim, but doable. In the US, most riders are not commuters, but this bike is aimed at commuters and not touring riders or sport riders. The commuting aspect is clear with the NC. The frunk space, the high mileage, no need for the goofy top cases or expensive over-the-top saddle cases that you see on ADV bikes. You can slip through traffic using this bike and still carry your lunch and all your clothes and your laptop in the frunk. The DCT in this bike is brilliant. This bike also comes as a manual, but the DCT costs a little bit more than the manual version, which I also owned. The DCT does everything the manual does, minus the shift lever and the clutch lever. The bike is also a bit heavier and wider at the base because of the DCT. But the bike carries its weight well. The forward-leaning engine feels like the forward lean of modern scooters. That's how they made that frunk, by twisting the two-cylinder engine forward. The DCT from Honda started out in the VFR 1200, which wasn't very successful either. It's a bike that's rarely seen, and I've only seen one in the showroom, that is the VFR 1200. In 2012, this NC700X had DCT. And now look at Honda's lineup. Many of their bikes, including the Honda Goldwing, has DCT. Oh my lord! The frunk, of course, is one of the benefits of this motorcycle. In the place where a normal gas tank is, there is none. There's just a recess for storage. Honda did this by pointing the engine forward, very much like a modern scooter. Suspension on this bike is nothing particularly good. It's budget suspension. You see these conventional style forks that behave good enough. It's always good enough. You step away from a BMW GS or Super Tenere or GSX R1000, you realize that the suspension costs a lot of money. This one is just enough. Nothing you can't fix with some emulators and better oil, but it's never going to be great suspension. And you have to kind of come to terms with that. It has about 5 inches of suspension, which might be enough to deal with some urban potholes, but you won't be taking this bike to the motocross track. It's not an off-road bike. It is wearing the clothes of an ADV bike, but remember, still has a 17-inch wheels front and rear, and it won't make a great off-road bike. I have seen riders, of course, ride these bikes off-road and even in sand dunes, which is kind of crazy. But that has more to do with the rider rather than the bike. With the 17-inch wheels, it feels very much like a standard commuter. It would have been nice if the NC had a 19-inch front to compete with the V-Strom 650 from Suzuki. This would put it in the adventure category instead of the commuting category. I believe that Honda made a mistake with this new concept where they put the filler for the gas tank. They put it in the rear under the seat. As riders that have ridden for a while, you know that the rear seat has been mostly used for carrying gear. BMW had the foresight to put it on the side. The brakes are adequate for the power of the bike. There's really no complaints. I've ridden KLR 650. I know what crappy brakes are. I also enjoy that Honda gave us just one rotor. It looks kind of cool, less maintenance, less parts to get. But with 50 horsepower, you really don't need two rotors. This model does have ABS, which gives us a little bit more weight with the ABS pump, but it's still a very lightweight bike. The key feature of this bike is that the engine is a very low revving engine. And when you have low revving engines, you basically up the longevity and durability of the motor. While bikes rev to the moon these days to get power, this one makes power down low and right in the middle. That's exactly where most riders need it, but usually don't realize it. When you're riding this bike, the power is always there. It's always in the right revs. It doesn't have much power, but it always has enough power. The great things about servicing this engine is that it uses a very simple screw and nut type of adjuster to adjust the valves. You don't need shims, you don't need to measure. Almost all new modern bikes have shims that create frustration everywhere with riders when it comes to service. This one, you pop the radiator off, you got access to the engine top, valves are done. So the question is, who would get this bike? The type of rider that gets this is someone who realizes they need just about this amount of bike to get around. No more, no less. Often you see riders entering the market as new riders who are put off by the overly powerful and expensive motorcycles available. Because of this simple engine and engineering, riders all over the world rack up an abnormal amount of miles with very little problems. Riders are re-entering the market after a long hiatus, want an easy bike to relearn, and of course, riders who don't particularly like shifting. There are also riders who have handicaps such as arthritis that will not want to shift manually. Now, hardcore motorcyclists who complain about the DCT removing the nature of motorcycle riding were also the ones that complained about bikes getting electric starts when they were kickstarting their bikes. There are some technology that is really good in motorcycling, and the DCT is one of those technologies that's here to stay with the amount of Hondas that you see with the DCT system. The weight down low, like the automatic transmission, the fact that you get the same amount of miles per gallon on this that you would get on a small 150cc to 200cc scooter, that is why you would want this. Now, I think that the NC700 in DCT is the one to get, but the manual version has some benefits that this one doesn't have. First, this one is a little bit wider, having that DCT. It's also a little bit heavier, having DCT and ABS. So if you like less complexity, the manual version is for you. But there's something really cool about having no gears to shift. So here is the engine, and this is the DCT cover. Now, one of the things you can tell right away from the 6-speed transmission version is that when you put your foot down, your leg, your bottom leg, actually rubs this. This kind of stands out quite a bit. It's a good 5 inches from the frame. On the other one, you do not get this. You just get like a very simple cover and maybe like less 3 inches. So it's kind of interesting that they do have this, and here is your oil level. But this is very plasticky. I have never worked on a bike with DCT. This one seems to be effortless. There's no issues with the DCT at all. You can see here dual clutch transmission. All right, let's look at the left handlebar, because this is a very interesting part of the bike. There is no clutch lever here, as you can tell. What you have here is a handbrake, and it's locked, and then you have a button here, and you have to kind of use one hand to kind of push it in, another one to pull it down, but that is the position for moving. If you do push this up, you do get a parking brake on the instrument panel that you can't really move. Here you have your high beams, traditional. There is no passing button. There also is a hazard button, which I haven't seen that in a while. You have a horn and then a turn signal. This is something that Honda has done they reversed the traditional location of the turn signal and the horn. You have this button, which is a plus, and this one's a negative. So you can ride this bike like you would a manual transmission motorcycle with just buttons. So this is a particular interesting thing. So when you start the bike, it's in neutral. When you want to start driving, you push it that way, it goes into D. And then you push it again, and it goes into S. S and D are different. D is the more economical way of driving. It should have really been called an eco mode, and S is sport mode. So it keeps the revs lower. You know, normally when you go from 0 to 50, it goes to like 6 gear, but when you put it on S, it does tend to keep it like in 4th and 5th a lot more. So you feel the revs much higher on S than you do on D. And by the way, this is a very expensive key to make. It uses the Honda HIS system. If you put it here, you have the ability of opening your gas cap to the left and opening your trunk to the right. And now this is the really big benefit to commuters. So where traditionally you would have a gas tank, what you have now is a very deep pocket here that you can put a full-size helmet in here. But this is mostly done for commuters. Commuters have the option of putting in side cases, top cases, but on this bike, you don't need that. You have built-in storage into here. This is the amazing feature behind this bike. It's that very deep pocket. Now, this only really appeals to people like me who like bikes to be functional. And when you have functional bikes, I find them much nicer to kind of ride every single day. So here you have 2 bolts. That's all you need to pull this out and reveal the battery. This is your toolkit. Underneath here, you do have a pocket for maybe putting your registration for the bike or whatever. But the benefit of having the battery here is that it's a little bit higher up than most bikes, but not by much. But also, if you want to run wiring to the front, to the handlebars, you can just run very short wires. Or if you have there is kits that you can buy that attach to here, and it would be a USB charging socket or for your phone. So it's much easier to keep everything waterproof here, and you're able to charge it. And also on this cover, you have quite a bit of a deep recess, so that is why a full-size helmet would fit here. This is where your gas goes. Now, you might be going, why is that a big deal? If you look at some BMWs like the F800, it has the gas cap off to the side. And the reason that's a much better design than this is that you can fill it without opening this up. But it's not a big deal opening it up. But if you have, say, a book bag, or you're doing a little bit of touring, one of the things that riders want to do is put their sleeping bags or tent across the rear seat, and then they will use that as storage. Now, if you have to constantly be removing stuff just to open this up, it gets very annoying very quickly. Now, this is a very nice feature that it keeps the seat open, because it would be very annoying for this to go down on you. It's just this little bar. But also, one of the things that Honda tends to do is like they cheapen out. This is something that you would see on scooters. As a matter of fact, this is from my 1985 Honda Elite 150, and it fits right in here because Honda likes to use parts from other bikes. And I do think that this is kind of aesthetically pleasing, but it is a very old school of designing bikes, having this huge stalk that kind of comes back from the bike and away from the tailpiece. And it becomes a whole like different system with wiring and turn signals and license plate brackets. It's not exactly everybody's taste. This is more of a European style design, but there are a lot of people that do not like this sort of like system. I myself kind of find it, uniquely interesting because it kind of sets everything away. If you're like planning on putting luggage on the bike, this doesn't get in the way. It doesn't, when you have things like flopping over, you know, like a book bag or whatever, it doesn't get in the way of the taillight. One of the things that Honda did with this bike is that they put stock turn signals, and you might think, well, what's the big deal with these stock turn signals? If you're a beginner rider, as a lot of people tend to be with these bikes, you're going to drop the bike, and this one's been dropped. You can see the previous owner put some tape on here, but the reason you want these turn signals as opposed to the integrated turn signals is that if you drop it, they break. They are very inexpensive to get and replace because you can get them anywhere in different styles, LED bulbs, everything. Now, if these were integrated into the plastic, as a lot of motorcycles and scooters tend to be, what would happen is that you would break it, the plastic would break, it would be much more expensive and much more difficult to replace as opposed to these types. This is a very quiet exhaust system, and it takes some time for motorcycle riders to start admiring quiet exhausts. If you get in trouble a lot with the law, you get speeding tickets, the last thing you want is a loud exhaust because sometimes you ride with your ears. This is very quiet, and I'll turn on the bike right now. And you can see, like, very, very quiet. It's fuel injected, so it starts right up, but you can hear the note. It is, you know, it sounds good, except it's not the type of like motorcycle that gives you a passionate sort of exhaust note, which is fine. I like to keep this. The only reason I would replace one of these is to replace it with something that's lighter. All of these stock ones are extremely heavy. So that's something that owners of every motorcycle do. Some people get the exhaust for the sound, some get them for the lightweight savings. All around is a very easy bike to work on. So to adjust the chain, you have these two nuts on each side, and that's how you adjust it. Very easy, very simple. You would just kind of like match it, and there's these, this is the marks right here. You would loosen the axle and then adjust those. Of course, you know, this bike is so efficient, you really don't do that very often, but you still have to replace chains every 10,000 miles. This one's got a really nice looking rotor disc brake, and of course it's got the ABS system. That's the ABS line coming in. With the ABS bikes, you do have a little bit more weight because you have the ABS pump, and it's non-spoke, so it's using the cast wheels. I actually find these completely okay. I like the idea of not truing wheels. And this is a bike that's more of a commuter than it is a performance bike. Nobody gets this bike for performance. People get this if they want to crunch in a lot of miles. So, and this is a 17-inch rear. Front is a 17-inch, which is kind of like a little bit of a downside. I believe that Honda should put a 19-inch front on this bike. It would have been a much better idea. Now, I'm a big fan of grab rails. You know, when you have the passenger, you want her to be, or him, grab these grab bars and be relatively safe. But for the most part, grab rails are really good for commuters because you can like strap things onto the seat and use this as a bungee or attachment point. The first NC700 that I had did not have these little winglets. So there's these winglets here that attach to the side, and there's one here, one on the other side, and a couple on the bottom. So there is the other winglet there, and if you just kind of look up a bit, you look at the orientation of the engine. So this is a very unique engine design. This is the more interesting thing about this bike is the orientation of the engine, the angle of the engine. Now, a lot of people, including Motorcycle Magazine, describes this engine as being a Honda Fit engine that's been cut in half. I don't know how valid that is, but the Honda Fit does have a very forward engine. This engine is very interesting because if you are a home mechanic, this is the engine that you want to get. So it used to be all sorts of motorcycles had the the valves that you could adjust using like a screw and a nut. But then they started making these engines that had shims. So the shim system is much more efficient and reliable, and it holds the valve specs much longer. My Super Tenere does have that. Most modern bikes do have the shim sort of system, but this one uses the older style, which makes it so much easier to kind of live with. If you're a home mechanic, adjusting this is very simple. You would have to move the radiator just slightly, and you have the ability to reach the head of the engine. The cover is right over here, so it's a very simple sort of engine to work on. Like, that is something that is very unique to this, because Honda designed this to be a very easy bike to work on. Now, you don't hear of any motorcycle makers making bikes easy to work on, because it doesn't really matter too much to a higher percentage of motorcyclists that use motorcycles only for weekend activities. But the people that get the NC700, NC750, V-Strom tend to be people that ride year-round and tend to commute. So that's the reason you would want the old-school valve adjustment rather than the new style. You know, I kind of feel that the chain system on this bike should not have been added. I kind of feel it should have had a belt system. NC stands for New Concept, and I know that the chain is an efficient way of getting power to the ground and it's cheap, but I kind of feel that this bike should have been given either a shaft drive, which would have been limiting in expense. That's something that's on higher end bikes, but a belt drive system like the BMW F650 CS had would have been a much better solution to this, because it is a new concept, as Honda puts it. Up front, you have a really large diameter rotor, and the rotor stops the bike just fine. Like, I've heard of people saying that it doesn't have enough stopping power, but I do find that it's absolutely adequate for the amount of power that this bike has. This is a pretty decent Nissan brake caliper. It's got ABS, very large rotor and ABS rotor. It's a 17-inch front wheel, which is a perfectly good bike for commuters. And you do have conventional forks. The biggest gripe I have currently with the bike is the suspension is not good. It's not good in a way that it just doesn't compare to high-performance bikes. Like, even adventure bikes, they have better suspension, and everybody's going with the upside-down forks. This is conventional, which is fine. Very easy to work on. Like, that's something I can't say enough about these type of bikes. Very easy forks to remove. So you could possibly even get fork gaiters here and kind of help protect the fork leg a little bit more. But if you were to ever do fork seals, very easy bike to work on. You can just, there's 2 bolts. You know, you can reach them without removing any plastic, and you can remove the entire front end out. You know, this is something that Honda does a lot. You know, they put these vents here, but there is no need for venting because there's no ports here. So this is just entirely for show. And I do like the headlight system of the Honda. So if I turn on this, it is perfectly adequate, the light. It does kind of stick out quite a bit. This is plastic. And if I start it, and I hit the high beams, very simple system. This is a very budget-oriented bike, so you're not going to find LED lights, you're not going to find anything high-end on it, but what they do give you is a budget, economical bike that you can keep for a very long time, commute on it, tour on it. So let me go ahead and start it. Starts right up. This is the DCT version, so all you have to do is like push D and you're going. So let it warm up a little bit and we're gonna go for a spin. If you're wondering how to ride this bike, if it's in neutral, it's not engaged. So what you do is you just push the D here and we're ready to go. Well, it is actually kind of, it's so easy to ride, and the seating position is really good on it. So it's a fairly big bike, and in a time when gas has gone up to $3.40 here, this thing gets 65 miles to the gallon out of a 700. That's like scooter-like mileage. If I give it a lot of gas, it actually downshifts to third from fifth. See, fourth gear. It doesn't like pop a wheelie, but... So here's the thing that you're probably not going to hear too much about. When you put your feet down on the ground, on this bike, because of the width of the DCT transmission, whatever, your leg kind of rubs up against it. But on the standard version, because it's narrower, it doesn't touch it. So that's a little bit of an annoyance. Not much, but I mean, for me, I usually pay attention to these things. Alright, we're still in sport mode, or we're still in drive mode. You can see there's like some twisties coming up. I want to see how she goes around. There is like a weird delay. In a way, I kind of feel like I would want it to stay in a specific gear, but I don't know if that would be faster with a standard one or this. I mean, this is actually really fast, selecting your own gear, and I'm not even in sport mode. That's incredible. And see, it puts me in fourth gear, so it does put me in the optimal gear. Oh, please don't turn left. Please don't turn left. Please don't turn. Oh, so good. Okay, perfect. Of course, another bad thing about this is that it has got a very short, very small gas tank. So even though it gets 65 miles to the gallon, you're going to be filling this thing up often because it is a very limited range. And they could have easily put a gas tank that was a little bit bigger, put something a little bit bigger, and increase the range to like 300. I mean, that's what adventure riders want. You know, it's not the idea is the adventuring. That's what sells the bikes, but very few people on GSs actually go on adventures. It's most of the time they're Starbucks bikes. It's the same thing with this. Like, I kind of feel it missed its mark. It's got a cool engine, very fuel efficient engine. It's one of these engines that a home mechanic can still work on it. So when you can work on a bike like this, I mean, everything about this bike is for a home mechanic. And you push it here, and now I'm in sport mode, and automatically it went down to 4, from 6 to 4. You have to be careful because all the leaves. There we go. Third gear. So the difference between D and S is that it's really one gear lower. It keeps it really down low. Even like riding with a manual, I never really go to third gear in these corners. It is pretty quick. I think this bike will surprise a lot of people. Alright, fourth gear, going into a corner, give it gas. Third gear, so it automatically just pushes it down one gear. I'm gonna do like a, look at this. This is top speed, full throttle. Alright, let go. I don't want to go too fast here, but there's it doesn't give you like that kick in the pants sort of power. I think a inexperienced rider could probably ride this faster on a manual transmission bike. The suspension, it's definitely not very confidence inspiring. You can see my handlebars kind of like just flying all over the place. It almost feels like it's got power to do wheelies, but not really. So this is a little bit of a tricky corner. Oh, see, it downshifted quite a bit for me. Wow. I kind of want to ride with a bunch of people just so I can compare speed. I mean, it is quick. I am going pretty darn quick for... I was not expecting it to be this fast, especially in automatic. It turns really quick. Okay, full blast, full throttle. Pretty good. Yeah, this bike does surprise... I think it will surprise a lot of motorcyclists. It's that good. It's that quick. And it handles really good for such a small bike. I mean, look at it. It is sprightly, very nimble. Wow. It is an incredibly quick bike. But you do feel it. Like, it does feel like the actual miles. 60 does feel like 60. Let's try out the fully manual version. So you see this button? You push it and the D disappears. That means that we are in fully manual mode. And to change the gears, you have shifters here. So let's go ahead and try this. I'm not used to it because it feels very weird to shift using your hands as paddles for me anyway. So right now, there we go. You just go, I'm in 5th. Now I'm in 6th. I think it does downshift for you. Let me see if I slow down. If it feels like I'm lugging it, I think it will. Yeah, I wonder if yeah, see, it downshifted because it realized that I'm lugging it. So there we go. You know, my way of riding is I prefer to be high up, because if I'm just commuting, I don't want to be like over revving. I knew a guy that used to like commute, and he would like go through town, DC, into the Hirshhorn Museum where he worked, and he would be in 2nd gear, like revving like crazy. And he kind of told me, I'm gonna go through here. You see this right here? Downshift to 1st. There we go. 2nd, 3rd. There we go. 3rd gear. I want to just get the best gas mileage ever. And I think this bike would have made a whole lot more sense when I was commuting through DC. But I don't know, like, it takes a while for you to kind of learn how to use the paddle shifters. The automatic version is a whole lot more intuitive. You know, I kind of wonder why they don't put the paddle shifters like on your foot. You know, because motorcycles are used to the foot shifting. But I guess it's just a different style. Yeah, you could shift really high if you want. So 5th gear, 6th gear, and we're moving. Yeah, see, I'm not used to it. And like, sport mode does feel a whole lot more interesting to ride to it. So 4th gear, this would be what the sport mode would be. It would be in 4th gear. I think a lot of times too, I will stay in a low gear, especially like the Tail of the Dragon. It's like you don't need to get out of the 4th gear on a Super 10 rig to ride that thing, but that kind of makes you lazy. If you really like the revving, as you have the parking brake right over here. To release it, you have to kind of push this and out. I guess it is kind of like a scooter. But the NC700X is one of those bikes that goes against the grain of new motorcycles. It's cheap, it's simple, it's light, it's durable, it's efficient, it's got a low center of gravity, built-in storage, and it's extremely easy to service. Honda gave us just enough bike without any of the bike lard that you see on new motorcycles.